Hello and welcome back to the second way of doing this year 8. And I must just confess, I had some lovely emails yesterday from Miss Carhart, who was with you, saying how good you were, how well you worked, how she was so pleased with you. So it really made me smile. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that you responded so well. So here we go, lesson 2. So it says at the top, we've got a do now activity. Now this is just a really quick recap on some of the key things we were thinking about on Monday. So it reminds you here that the subject is the person, place, or thing carrying out the action, that verb is an action, and the object is the thing to do with the thing to which the object is carried out upon. Right, so all you need to do in each sentence is write down the subject. So for number 1, the boy ate his lunch. What is the subject? For number 2, the cat hid under the car. What is the subject? Who or what is it about? Number 3, the people gathered at the door. Number 4, it followed the girl. And number 5, someone stood at the door. So when you're ready, into your books, just say do now number 1, and you just write the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the word that is the subject. Okay, Miss will pause, and then when you're ready, we'll look at the answers together. Right, people, are we ready? Should be able to suddenly see the correct answers now. Woo! Okay, look at that. So were you right? So number 1, the boy. So answers the question, who ate his lunch? The boy did. What hid under the car? The cat. Who gathered at the school? People. What followed the girl? It did. Who stood at the door? Someone. So these are all those subjects. They're all words that label the person, place, or thing carrying out the action. Guys, give yourself a mark out of 5. If you got any wrong, just have a moment, look at the definitions up there and think, what were you thinking maybe more about verbs or objects? Think it through you. Okay, now moving on to today's learning. So we're still in this topic of Old and Middle English, and we did our history lesson yesterday. And now we're going to zoom in on a particular aspect of life during the Middle English period. But just to recap, on yesterday's lesson, we're going to think about these answers and write these in your book. So number 1, can you name one of the tribes that invaded Britain? Oh, remember we said that Britain, because it was an island and it was actually quite a small island, wasn't it? Could have been invaded by different tribes. Now, a little clue, they were coming over from Denmark and Germany. We sometimes still use some of these words. Who were one of the tribes that invaded Britain? Number 2, what language was introduced to England as a result of the Norman conquest? A little clue by my accent, listen as I read it. What language was introduced to England as a result of the Norman conquest? So that's number 2. Number 3, are the words and us an example from Old or Middle English? So these are words we still use today all the time. In 2020, these words have not disappeared, but were they from the Old or Middle English period? How old are the words and us? And finally, in Middle English, what would you speak? See my typo. What would you speak if you were poor and not very posh? Would you speak English or French? So guys, most of these I believe are short one-word answers. So we're just going to let Miss pause whilst we recap, and we'll look at the answers together soon. Okay, guys, we ready for the answers? Right, name one of the tribes that invaded Britain. The Saxons, the Jutes, or the Angles? Angles, that's where you get Anglo-Saxon from, guys. So I'll let you give yourself a mark there. What language was introduced to England as a result of the Norman conquest? French. Lots of the aristocracy, the ruling classes were the French. Are and us, were they an example from Old or Middle English? Brilliant. Old English. And guys, in Middle English, what would you speak if you were poor and not very posh? English or French? English. So all the posh, rich people at the top of the hierarchy in England would have been speaking French because that's who was ruling. That's who everybody wanted to be like, the posh French at the top. So if you were a peasant, if you were poor, if you were an everyday common man like me, you would be speaking English. Okay? So brilliant recap there, guys. Give yourself a mark out of 4. And now on to something new. So guys, we need to know what this term means for the work we're going to do today. So into your books, we're going to just write down the key term pilgrimage. Okay, so a pilgrimage, a little clue looking at this guy, he's got his walking stick in his backpack, is a journey to a sacred place or a place of significance. And a pilgrim is a person who goes on a pilgrimage. Now, one part of this, actually, so just whilst you're writing that down, I'll just talk to you. I will be quiet in a minute if you prefer quiet. Is to understand what's meant by a sacred place or a place of significance. Now, you've got to remember, guys, we are back in the Middle Ages, okay? We're in Middle English territory a long time ago. So what those people thought of as sacred or a place of significance would have probably been linked to religion. Now, has any of you ever been to Stonehenge? Maybe, because that's an example of a sacred or a significant place that still survived over many, many thousands of years. And people might journey there to visit it. Now, in certain countries, there are churches or religious places that people will still journey to. So when we talk about a sacred place or a place of significance, it's often places that have a religious value. So they can be important. So people will go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem or to where Jesus was born in Bethlehem. People who are Muslim will do a pilgrimage to Mecca. And at least once in their life for a Muslim, it's really important that they could get to Mecca at least once in their life. Now, I don't want to downgrade the idea of sacred places or places of significance, but we do sometimes see football fields or football homes. The clubs of the big football teams could be considered sacred. And for somebody that absolutely loves football, they might go on a pilgrimage to the stadium of their favourite team. And that might be considered their pilgrimage. So really, we do want a pilgrimage to be to some place that is incredibly sacred, which means religiously important, or a place of significance. And a pilgrim is a person who goes on a pilgrimage. Okay, so Miss can pause now, or Sir, and once you've got that written down, we're just going to test it. Okay, so to go with our definition, we're going to decide which is the correct use of the noun pilgrimage. So we're going to have a little think which uses the word correctly, and then we'll write it down. She went on a pilgrimage to the shops to buy milk. Now, guys, the question we've got to ask ourselves is, are the shops a sacred place? Not going to say anything. I just want you to hold that mind in your head. Okay. The trek to school took so long. It was a real pilgrimage. Okay, so let's just think. Is the school a sacred place? Could it be number 2? I don't know. What about number 3? The family went on a pilgrimage to Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem is the birthplace of Jesus, so it's got the religious link, so it could be a sacred place. So, guys, I want you to decide which you think is the right answer, 1, 2, or 3, and you're going to write it into your book as an example of pilgrimage in use. Are we ready to see the answer? Well, I'll let Miss pause it so you can write it down first, okay? There we go. So Bethlehem is the right use of pilgrimage because pilgrimage is a journey to a sacred place. Now, I actually quite like number 2 because number 2 is using a word pilgrimage, kind of like a metaphor. Okay, you can even say, so for me, school is a sacred place, and I look forward to journeying back to you one day after my period of isolation. But there we go. So we've got the family went on a pilgrimage to Bethlehem. Brilliant, guys. So why do we need to know this word? Well, we're going to be exploring one of the most famous stories ever, one of the most famous works of literature ever, and it involves a group of pilgrims on a pilgrimage. So we need to know these words because we're going to be looking at a story that's about a journey to a sacred place with a group of pilgrims in it. But to help us understand this quirky group of travellers, so before we look at them, we're going to get some background information on one of the pilgrims. Now, are you ready? Who is one of the pilgrims? Who is one of our quirky group of travellers? We're going to be looking at the world of knights. Oh, so when we start to look at this, and I'm building up a little bit of tension, I've not told you what it is, one of these most famous works of literature, one of the most famous books of all times about pilgrim, In it is a knight. One of our characters is a knight. But we need a little bit of background information today on what a knight is and what it means to be a knight. So when we get introduced to the story, we can be like, well, I get that. I understand that. I know what a knight is. So if you look here, it says we're going to read the description of knights together. And we're going to answer the following questions so that we can check our understanding. So guys, I don't want you to rush ahead of me. We're going to do this together. I'm going to read it and go through the questions, and then Miss will pause it and give you time. Are we ready? Knights. In the Middle Ages, kings needed armies to defend their lands, and it was a lord's job to serve his ruler as a knight. A knight had to have his own armour and a horse. He also employed staff who followed him into battle. They helped him mount and dismount his horse, and they took care of the horses and weapons. Not all knights were lords who owned their own land. Some lived in a lord's castle as part of his garrison, the group of soldiers that protected the castle. The lord paid for their costly armour. Okay, guys, so that's the first little bit of introduction and overview of what a knight is. So let's look at these questions, and then you're going to have time to answer them. So number one, what period of history were knights from? Number two, who needed armies to defend their lands? Number three, what did a knight have? Number four, what did a knight's staff help him to do? And number five, were all knights lords? So we're going to just pause it here. Miss is going to give you a set amount of time, and at the end we're going to make sure that we've got the 5 questions correctly answered. And all of this is to help us understand and build our knowledge of what a knight was and what a knight did. Okay, lovely people, let's look at the answers. Okay, so any minute now. Hey, so what period of history were the knights from? So actually it tells us right away in the beginning phrase here, in the Middle Ages. So there's our phrase. It's not got a verb in it, but it's telling us when something happened. So the period of history that knights were from were the Middle Ages. So Middle Ages is our correct answer. Brilliant. So knights were very much of the past, the Middle Ages. Now, you might know, because you watch the news or TV, that we still knight people. The Queen still gets to choose who her knights are going to be, and they become Sir so-and-so and Sir so-and-so. She gives out knighthoods. But in modern times, it's a title, really, and it's a huge honour, but it's not the same as it was in the Middle Ages. So a knight was from the Middle Ages. Okay, who needed armies to defend their land? So who needed the knights? Did you get it? Brilliant. It's the kings. So the kings needed armies to defend their lands, protection. So knights were part of the king's armies. They were part of the protection. And look, it was quite interesting because it was actually a lord's job to become a knight to serve his ruler. So who needed the armies though? So who needed the knights in the first place? The kings did. It was all about protection and keeping the land safe, defending the land, probably from the Jutes and the Angles and the Saxons that were coming over. Okay, it was all about protection. Brilliant. So number 3, what did a knight have? Now, I've just done it quickly here, but I'm hoping you would have written a nice sentence. So a knight would have a horse and his own armour. Can you see it there? So a knight had to have his own armour and a horse. Now, a horse, obvious, in the sense that that was their transportation. They would ride the horses into battle, and armour. Now, this is what made being a knight quite tricky, because armour was really expensive. You didn't want cheap armour. What might happen if you had cheap armour? A knock on the head, a knock to the body. Your armour was your protection. So actually, that's why it was often a lord's job, because the lord would already have the money to buy his armour. Brilliant. So what did a knight's staff help him to do? So a knight would have the money to buy his horse and armour, but he'd also have money to pay people. So it says here, he also employed staff, which is where he's paying them, who followed him into battle. They helped him mount and dismount his horse, and they took care of the horses and weapons. Okay, so his staff would help him into battle to get up and down off his horse. Imagine, you are a knight decked out in a full suit of metallic armour. The heavy armour was probably stronger and more durable. You're going to take a few more blows. So, of course, you can't get up and off your horse too easily. you needed somebody to help you. And they would also clean your weapons, feed the horses at the end of the day, make sure they were healthy. So again, a knight was somebody that had money already, a bit of status. But were all knights lords? No. Brilliant. Not all knights were lords who owned their own land. So a lord would own their own land. He would then become a knight when the king would call upon him. Some, however, would already live as part of the lord's castle, as part of the soldiers protected, and he would pay for your costly armour. So you could be a knight without being a lord if you could find somebody to pay for your armour. Brilliant. So make sure you got the right answers down, and we'll move on.